in talk therapy, it's really hard to ever get to a sense of ownership and completion, because even though you may have told your story for like the 100th time and you feel heard and you feel loved and accepted in that, you won't have built that inner system of feeling safe in experiencing what's coming in your life. And you can only do that when you bring your attention to the body. You can't do that just by about speaking about the past. The big piece around the stories we tell about ourselves and how that is basically the prism we see reality through, and that often we don't want to change, not because we don't want the outcome that's going to come with the change, but because we actually have to die as who we think we are in order to get to that place. And so often it's the resistance to that process of letting go, to letting go of the consistency, to letting go of making sense with the story we've been telling about ourselves our entire life, that is really in the way. And that's the piece that we get to really work on. And then the connection to my own journey with that, around being identified as the girl who had an issue with food. And even though I was saying that I wanted to be freed from that, actually making choices every day and kind of reproducing fear patterns and beliefs that actually continued confirming this identity of suffering. And then how it's connected to a bigger collective piece of often whatever we carry is not only ours, it's what came in generations before us, but also what's swimming around us in the collective. And to have the awareness of that helps us realize that the work is a work that is not up to me, but up to we, and something that we get to rewire as a collective. So of course, one-to-one processes are very important, and I love my one-to-one work, and I see the incredible impact it can have. And community work is so important, and coming together as a collective and say, oh, I feel this too, and oh, actually this doesn't belong to me or you, it belongs to us. And how do we move beyond that?
And what, if you could summarize it in a sentence, what is that impact that you want to have on the collective?
Yeah, really supporting people in coming home to that sense of fullness and wholeness, and deeply loving and accepting themselves and knowing that they're fine. And by that, also giving the permission to others to be just as they are. And then from a place of actually really loving ourselves and each other, creating change. To actually build a world that reflects that understanding.
Yeah, I love that. I feel like that's so helpful for anyone who's scared about being themselves or doing something that's more aligned with who they are. When you remember that by you doing that, you're like allowing other people to also be themselves.
Yeah.
So you can think of doing it like in service of others. Because it seems so scary how people will respond to you, but actually you're helping free them as well.
Yeah. And honestly, I feel like that's been one of the most mind-blowing pieces of my journey, is to realize that every single time I took a step towards more integrity and authenticity, which often felt like dying and felt like letting go of an image or an idea or a potential performance that I was putting on, that the main fear came from not being accepted and from not being seen. And again, like time after time after time, realizing that yes, there was sometimes some resistance, because when you change and move more into authenticity, you're also inviting other people to do the same, and some people don't want to change, and so there can be some resistance. But I would say the majority of people actually came back saying, we are inspired by you, and you give us the permission to do the same. So there's at least my own experience, and it also comes from being in quite open environments, I would say, but still, like, even the least open parts of my community have been incredibly supportive and have come then to me asking me questions, and asking for support in doing the same.
Amazing. Yeah, I think some resistance is normal. Like, if you think about it as if you're a group of people that's all like sitting on the couch all the time, and then one person decides to start running, everyone else is going to hate on that person, because it probably makes you look at yourself. So that's a natural, and that I feel like is really hard growing up, when you suddenly want to do something different to how your friends are doing and whatever. But yeah, you still have to do it, and then trust they will understand eventually. Or with parents, or yeah, and then sometimes it's like never, because if it's a religion and you're leaving the religion, and sometimes it can be like a lifetime of on the outside, although there's always potential to heal. Anyway.
But I do want to share one example about this, which is when I stopped drinking 7 years ago, or 8 years ago, because it was my first allergy. Like, that's the first allergy I developed, was to alcohol. So I would get rashes whenever I drank. And I remember still going out to the pub with my friends, and I was living in London. And speaking of religion, in a way, like, alcohol is a religion in the UK. And I remember one of my best friends being really weird with me. Like, I didn't understand what was going on that whole evening. He was very, yeah, just distant. And then at some point I decided to confront him. I was like, hey, like, what's going on for you? And my assumption inside of me was that he was judging me because I wasn't drinking anymore, and that he thought that I wasn't fun, and he thought that I didn't belong anymore. And what came out was actually that he was worried that I was judging him because he was still drinking. And so we went into this beautiful conversation of realizing we were both scared of the other person's judgment, but actually still really supporting what they were choosing to do. Um, yeah, so I feel like it's a beautiful example of seeing, actually, the people that we love just want us to do what's right for us. And the resistance that comes is more around what it's confronting them to see about their own experience. But when spoken about, it can really open the ground for beautiful conversation, and sometimes for deeper connection.
Yeah. And yeah, especially if you're not being the person that's like, I'm changing now, everyone else has to change, or like, yeah, anytime you're telling someone like how to live their life, like, people are not going to respond well
Oh
to
yeah.
that.
Yeah. Also, you have no idea, right? Like, that is coming from ignorance, and probably from trying to convince to yourself that what you're doing is the right thing. Like, I've had that different points of my journey when I was trying to convince other people of doing something I was doing, was probably because I wasn't fully convinced myself. I feel like true confidence in your own decisions comes as an invitation for others, rather than as an obligation. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so for context, to the audience, we were talking about episode 93, where Silba shares her growing up story. And yeah, the whole food, I feel like the focus was kind of your experience with food, that journey, that out of body experience, just crazy how everything changed for you from only eating 20 foods, or being able to eat 20 foods, to now. Well, what's your relationship with food like now?
Mm. Hmm. Hmm. If we see it as a relationship to a person, it's almost like it used to be like this like toxic romantic relationship, which was so time consuming, so energy consuming, so present all the time, and mostly negative. But still there was this like, yeah, this like love hate intensity. And now it feels like food has become like a dear friend that I'm really comfortable with and that I feel very supported by in my everyday life. But there's very few processes we need to go through. Like if there's an issue, we bring it up, we have a conversation, then we move on. And we can still have really beautiful experiences together. We go out and have, for example, a new beautiful food that's really rich in flavor, and that's like a beautiful new experience with this friend. But it's based in this relationship of trust, in this relationship of just knowing that we can, yeah, we can rely on each other. So it feels like one of those, yeah, key pillar grounding relationships that will probably be a relationship for life.
Hopefully.
I mean, yeah. I think when there is no relationship anymore and if we separate, I might die, but that's okay. Yeah.
Okay, and it doesn't take, yeah, so there's no more fighting or consuming all that energy, like when you just have a healthy friendship. That's an amazing analogy or metaphor,
Yeah.
whatever it is.
Yeah.
Yeah, because when you have like a really good friend, there's no, I mean, that's a healthy relationship. You're not spending all that time like thinking about them and because you're in an argument or whatever it is.
Yeah.
Or it's, yeah, cool. So
there
it's more,
isn't there isn't anymore the element of obsession and aversion. Like that's the main thing that's shifted. Now it doesn't mean there aren't any challenges. Like there are still days where I have some charge around what I'm eating, but it's almost like this ground is one of trust. And so I know that whatever comes up, I can meet it with honesty, with integrity. Yeah, and by really facing it, because I feel like with the avoidant obsessive energy was this distance, actually, where I felt like I didn't have control over it. I was trying to get control, but it felt like it was really chaotic. Well, now it's like, okay, this comes up of like, oh, I noticed that I've had a big dinner and now someone's offering dessert and there's something inside of me that says I shouldn't have that dessert. It's like, okay, let me be with that. Where is it coming from? Is it actually what my body is experiencing, or is it just the fact that I am? And often it's impacted by the collective I'm in. So this could happen if I'm at a table with like six other women and three of them have said, oh no, I don't want dessert because I've already had enough and I shouldn't have more. And I'm like, okay, should I be thinking the same way? And then I tune into my body and I have now the tools and the practices that allow me to realize, oh, is this coming from fear, from a mind process, from an idea, from an outside idea, or is it actually what my body is telling me? And because I come from a background of mostly restriction, when in doubt, my safe choice is always to say yes to the thing that feels scary. So there's still moments where I have to notice, okay, there's fear here. It doesn't matter whether in the short term I'm going to feel too full afterwards or not. If there is fear, let me challenge that fear by having that dessert. And in the long term, it's worth my mental health.
so interesting. Yeah, because me in that situation would be like automatic, like I need dessert or I'll be deprived. And then so my fear is probably coming from scarcity of like, oh, this is like the last opportunity to ever get a dessert. I have to have one. If and like if the collective are choosing to not have it, they're depriving me or something.
Mm.
Oh no, I don't know. But usually it's like I am full. So it's like, oh, thank God we're not getting dessert because I would have to get one if someone else is getting. I don't know. Oh my God.
Yeah.
So many thoughts. Cool. Okay, I love this. I love this friendship thing. This, I can already see this is going to change my relationship with food by thinking about it like my friend
Mm. Mm.
and checking in how our relationship's going.
Yeah. Yeah. And I do really feel, especially working now more with people around this, that it's such a beautiful parallel to our relationships, all our relationships in our life. There's this author who wrote a book called Women, Food, and God. Her name is Janine Roth. And she says that the world is in our plate. And so the way we eat is such a beautiful reflection from the way we live. Um, and indeed it shows us our relationship to nourishment. It shows us how much we trust to allow something that's foreign to us to enter our bodies. It shows our relationship to desire, to longing, to the satiation of our needs. So it's a beautiful um yeah, a beautiful metaphor or symbolism of our relationship to life in general. And then there's a piece of our first food was mediated by, for most of us, was mediated by our mother and by breast milk. And so it's inherently relational. And if at any point in that childhood we had something in our relationship to our parents or to this nurturing energy that was an imbalance, is going to show up also in our relationship to food. And so there's such a beautiful opportunity as we rewire our relationship to food, and as we get to a place of deep nourishment and balance and trust, that will also rewire our relationships to humans and to everything in life. Yeah.
Cool. Okay, so I'm just imagining someone listening to this and thinking like, why are you thinking like they never overthink food, and they like cannot understand, this seems like alien to them, this conversation. And in my head, that's all like the people coming to my head are all men. Not saying men don't have these problems at all, but I'm wondering,
Yeah.
do you think there's an aspect of that specifically for women it's more complicated, or there's some kind of distinction there?
Yeah. So on this specific issue, I tend to work with slightly more women. But I've been really surprised speaking to men by how many men do have maybe not the same issues. For them, it's often, and I don't want to generalize here, this is based on my very limited data set, but in my data set, men tend to worry more about being toned and muscular and showing that they're strong than being thin and petite and yeah, kind of acceptable in looks. So there's a different taste. But because I link it all to just our disconnection to our bodies in general, and I see that as a societal phenomena, not as a gendered phenomena at all, there's just different ways that gets expressed. Now, I do feel like because there's been a history of women have to be petite, and they have to be kind, and they have to be graceful, and they have to be presentable, and almost, like their appearance is the strongest or the most important trait about them. There is more of a tendency to cater to those types of traits. um and we could argue that there's some things mostly around, I would say, the nurturing of the feminine, so the growing into a gendered identity. I'm not sure that those variations would be there at birth, for example, but then we nurture humans within a gendered role. And I would say, yes, that being raised in a gendered role, or like raised as a so-called woman or feminine, um, brings a higher likelihood to have issues around taking up space, um, with the body, with our voices, with our expression.
Yeah, because I guess there's also the added element of like what is the proper way for a woman to eat, or am I attractive, am I ordering something that makes me attractive, or am I eating in a way which I'm guessing for a lot of men, they're not thinking about like, oh, how attractive do I look eating this burger? I mean, but it's also kind of like the opposite, that it is like so attractive when men eat so much food, because it's like, yeah, because to your point, it's like they're so strong and they're eating all this meat, and it's almost like anyway. Okay.
Yeah. And then there's the whole spectrum in the middle, right? Of non-binary, of also queer identities, where that kind of shifts and changes as well. And so I really don't want to overgeneralize in terms of what sort of issues show up where and how. But I would say that, especially for more marginalized groups, and I include women in that as well, I would say that the issue is more around fear of taking up space and having to have an appearance that basically goes as unnoticed as possible to stay safe, because there is a risk of going too much out of the expectation. While in general, I've seen for especially cis white men, this more this like having to show that they're strong, and maybe an over focus on protein, an over focus on basically eating all of the food, and showing their muscles, show how much they can handle. Yeah. And again, stereotyping here.
Okay, so
Yes.
that was the first episode. Now, okay, so now, yeah, I want to know about your career and how it evolved. So, because I think we kind of got to the point that you moved to London to go to uni, you started studying more like international development stuff, realized like a lot of it is not that effective, maybe. And then became interested in the behavioural stuff, which you'd always be interested in, why people behave the way they do.
Yeah.
Why do we say that we want to do something and then we don't, and we actively do things that make us suffer, but we can't seem to change?
Yeah.
So what was the pathway from leaving uni? What did you then do?
Yeah. Yeah, so there was my first degree in London, which I spoke about last time, at the London School of Economics, which was a mix of environmental policy and international development. And indeed, getting to that place of feeling quite frustrated just by having listed all of the initiatives that we walked into as a collective and all the reasons why they failed. And I started getting more interested in micro decision making and looking at individual behavior, because that was also something I felt like I could connect more to and potentially have more impact on. And ended up then doing a master's in behavioral. It was called behavioral and economic science at the University of Warwick. And that was a year of really diving deep into behavioral sciences, kind of new models of economics that brought psychology back into economic models, but then also looking at a lot of different aspects of psychology and really trying to understand humans better, and specifically looking at the question of behavior. Indeed, like what are all the things, all the variables that actually impact and influence our behavior? And if we are to want a different outcome than what we're getting, how do we change our architecture of behavior, of decision? So where, like, the context of our decision, how do we change our inner decision making systems, our beliefs and our attitudes and our emotions, in order to get a different outcome? And I loved that degree. I had so much fun. I remember I've never studied as much as that year. I was so excited to go to the library all the time and doing loads of extra readings. And by that time, I had already started meditating and engaging in more like mindfulness practices, doing some yoga, and in general, just getting really curious about contemplative practices and all of these ancient Eastern philosophies that seem to carry a wisdom that I feel like our Western science was basically only, yeah, starting to catch up on. Um, and had gone the previous year actually to a conference. It was like this research symposium of a few days where contemplative practitioners, so monks who had meditated for like 30, 40, sometimes 50 years, would come together with Western scientists and policymakers and education experts and try to understand how we can bridge those worlds and how we can use these ancient traditions and wisdoms in order to inform some of this actually very novel science that we have around the human brain and emotions and attitudes. And so I ended up doing my master's thesis on how a short mindfulness practice, which was basically just a recording of 10 minutes, could nudge people to have more neutrality when they looked at new information. So I was looking at a phenomenon that's called motivated reasoning, which basically says that we as humans have a tendency when we find new information to look for the pieces of that information that are going to confirm our existing beliefs rather than seeing the information from a neutral perspective. And so this is also an element of that is called confirmation bias, really the sense of scanning our environment and our context in order to confirm our existing beliefs rather than from this place of openness of, oh, let me see if my beliefs are going to get countered. And I was trying to see whether even just a short mindfulness intervention, could decrease this urge that we have, or this tendency we have to confirm our own existing beliefs. And so I had a sample of 150 people and ended up finding an effect. It wasn't statistically significant, but it was an effect. Um, and that was just, yeah, the kind of the culmination of that first chapter of my research.
Cool.
Yeah.
So you did the master's straight after undergrad?
I had 1 year in between where I did some professional experiences. I worked at the United Nations conference of the parties on climate change. It was for the Paris Agreement. So I was working there for a couple of months before and then during the conference. Um, and then I worked in a research center in Italy, which is where my dad is from. And they work more on regional policy and trying to apply some of those environmental and development principles to their models. And it was really interesting for me to go and spend some time in Italy because I had never really lived there, and to also be closer to my little brother and to see him grow up a little bit. And then I ended up doing an internship in the summer in London at a health food startup. They were creating these organic chickpea puffs. And so I think their employee number like 4, and I was an intern, and I had this yellow bicycle, and I was just cycling around the whole of London, basically trying to convince corner shops to stock this new product that now is actually really well known, and pretty big. And then in the back office, doing like market comparisons of other brands and trying to figure out how they wanted to branch out. So really learning a lot about how to design, develop, and optimize a startup. And then I went back to do this master's.
Cool. So was that like a year of experimentation for you?
Exactly. Yes.
And did you know you would do further study?
I had a strong sense. Yes. Yes. Yeah. And I had a moment, it was interesting because I knew that I was interested in all these things that were quite different from the people around me. but still there was such a massive majority of the people I did my undergrad with that were going into management consulting or corporate law or investment banking, that part of me felt like I had to do the same. And so I remember reading through all of these application processes, especially for consultancies, because I was like, well, I have an interest in a lot of different topics, so maybe this diversity and these different levels of skills that I have could be interesting there. And it was fascinating. Now I live a lot more in my body, so I can trace back what the embodied experience was. But I remember every single time I looked at those applications, I felt like my entire body was caged. And it was totally coming from a place of wanting to reproduce, of wanting to fit in by doing the same thing. But I guess I had an intuition strong enough at that time to know that it was simply not my path. And I'm really glad that I ended up doing something that's maybe a little bit more patchworky and doesn't fit as neatly on a CV as other paths, but that feels like from the start was really mine and really resembled what I care the most about in the world.
So those three things you did felt like did any of it feel like you were proving yourself by going to the UN or trying to do something that was like as prestigious or something as what your other classmates were doing?
Um, no, they felt like quite true expressions, actually. And I mean, the UN conference just proved everything that I had felt in my undergrad of just, I, I felt actually very disillusioned there as well. I was like, there's Leonardo DiCaprio passing in front of me and nothing's happening. And the Paris Agreement was such a frustration for so many environmental activists and people in the field. And being there and noticing just how many people were present and how little was being implemented just proved that that was not the field that I wanted to really make a mark in.
Yeah, that was going to be my next question. If that kind of confirmed the policy chapter was closed for you.
Yeah.
Or at least at that point. Okay.
Exactly. From that angle and at that point.
And then, so did you know it was going to be that master's in that specific area?
So I had figured from my undergrad and from those extra courses that I took that I spoke about in the last episode that I was interested in micro human behavior. So that's what I searched for postgraduate degrees. And when I saw the Warwick degree, it just like something felt true in my body. I was like, oh, that's the one. And so I still applied to other ones just to to keep my options open and keep it safe in case. But I really had my eyes on that degree because it felt really really holistic. And it was also happening between three departments. So it's run by the Department of Economics, the Business School, and the Psychology Department. And so I loved this. Yeah, just knowing that there was already this course that was at the boundary between different departments felt aligned with, again, my identity as being at the border between disciplines and cultures and ideas and languages.
Cool. And does micro mean looking at how humans behave individually?
Yeah. Mostly. Yeah.
Okay. And then what
groups? Yeah.
And what was your pathway into meditation?
So I actually attended in my first or second year of university. So I was already a super curious mind. Like even when in my ages of binge drinking, I would be found in corners at parties having one-to-one conversations with people where we'd both be crying and like unraveling all of our deepest secrets. So there was always a depth and a curiosity about humans to me. Um, And I think it was at the end of my first year. There's someone who knew me from playing sports that told me about this woman who was doing a postgraduate degree in the School of Management and was trying to look at whether mindfulness could support management skills. And she was running a 3 days mindfulness training within the university for free for her research, and anyone could apply and participate. And so this friend who was herself doing a master's told me about it. She was like, I feel like that's something you'd be interested in. And so I ended up going to that. It was at the start of the summer. And that was the first time I ever meditated. She made us sit down on a chair and close our eyes and guided a little visualization. And I just remember feeling like home. I was like, wow, like this is the place that I've been looking for. And then sharing more about the impact of mindfulness, the research that's out there. And so my curiosity was deeply triggered then. And then it might have been at the end of my second year of undergrad. Anyway, and then that same summer, I went to California for a month by myself. It was my first solo trip, and I had this dream of California is going to be the place where one day I'll live. And so I went to, as a good behavioral, like experimental researcher, I went to experiment it by spending a month there by myself. And I ended up amongst all the different cultures and people that I visited. I spent some time in Santa Barbara, which is, for those who don't know, like really a spiritual mecca in California, where there's so many like modern day hippies. And I went to visit a friend, and we ended up going to the beach a lot, going to yoga, doing some meditation practices. And then at the end of the trip, she put in my notes in my phone, download Headspace, which is this meditation app. It will change your life. And so when I got back to the UK, I downloaded Headspace, and that's how I started meditating.
And what's your practice? Do you still meditate now?
Yes, I meditate almost daily. And I don't have a recorded practice anymore. So Headspace was super, super useful for me for the first 2-3 years. Then I found a lot of different types of meditation and traditions. And now for me, it's much more of a silencing practice of basically just getting to a place, usually first thing in the morning, where I can just sit down and let my mind open up and get to a place that's a little bit bigger than just my identity and my little problems. So I'd say it's a mix of a grounding and expansive practice. And I have a lot more kind of active meditation practices of, being just really aware of whatever I'm doing as I'm doing it, but to still involve and instill movement. But ultimately getting to a place where meditation is not something that I do on a cushion or in a certain time frame, but is a way that I live life, where every opportunity becomes a moment where I get to be aware of what is happening, to be fully present, to be intentional with my words, with my actions, with my interactions. um, and to really cultivate this deep intimacy with life. Because I feel like meditation can become this shield of, "Ooh, you're a complicated human, and this conversation is not supportive to my development." And then you go to your cushion and you're like, "Oh, now I'm feeling better." And I'm speaking about this from personal experience. Um, I feel like that's a first stage that a lot of people have, of like, oh, I found this inner peace. Now no one can come in the way of that. And then there's a slightly more advanced practice of realizing everything is a practice. Every moment is a moment of choosing whether to be fully present in the experience, and whether to resist it or to allow it. And so this, I'd say that my biggest meditation practice nowadays is really just trying to be present in every single moment.
Cool. Okay, so what did you do after the masters?
So after the masters, I actually ended up traveling to India. I went to India for 3 months. That was my second ever solo trip, like long solo trip. And I spent the first month mostly studying yoga because I was really curious about the whole philosophy. And I had started to understand that the movements that we did, so the asanas, the postures, were only one little part of this bigger philosophy. And from having gotten to really peaceful states after yoga practices, I was curious to learn more about it. And so I actually went and studied in 2 different ashrams, and was most touched actually by the yogic philosophy, and realizing that the yoga practices, the asanas, are only one of the 8 limbs of yoga. And so it's actually a tiny, tiny part of this massive philosophy, and getting a lot more into the philosophy, into the wisdom element of it, and really the worldview that sits behind it. um yeah, and so that I did that for a month, and then I traveled for another month, and then my partner at the time joined me for the third month. And then I headed back to London because in the meantime I had found a job in a consultancy, um, where they applied behavioral economics and behavioral science to different business issues. And so that felt at the time like the perfect kind of compromise for me, of still being able to be a consultant, but actually applying the frameworks and principles I was truly curious about, which was this behavioral lens.
Cool. Okay, so you had that. So the thing to India was more like a mini gap or holiday. It wasn't like you were searching and on this totally new path. It was like, okay, you'd go and explore, but then come back and live like a normal
Yeah,
quote unquote life in London.
yeah, yeah.
And how was the job?
The job was really frigging stressful for me. um yeah, I remember the almost the entire first year I had ulcers all over my mouth from how stressed I was. um I was still very much in an era of extra perfectionism, so I wanted everything to be perfect, to be right. We worked a lot with modelization of human behavior, and coding and statistical modeling and Excel sheets. And so, a lot of things that are very prone to tiny errors, that really it's by making mistake that then you make the model better. Um, and that was so hard for me because I was like, oh, I need to get it all perfect the first time round, and I need to prove myself here. Which is interesting because actually the company was quite relaxed compared to other consultancies. Most people in the company had PhDs in psychology or statistics or behavioral science, and so it was more of a, I would say, a nerdy company than a really business sharks culture. But still, it was just my own inner dictator that was pressing, um, and that made that really tiring. I would say very stressful. Um, and it was at a time where my food stuff was still quite restrictive. I don't think I was getting enough nutrition, and so the stress levels were probably also linked to that, of my body just being in a slight state of deprivation constantly. Even though it was like probably just under the bar, it was still under the bar. And so from a purely like metabolical level, I was in constant threat. um, and so I think that had a big impact. The work itself was interesting. There was some really cool projects. We applied these behavioral tools and models and approaches to a lot of different sectors. So there was quite a lot of working with company on how to design and develop and communicate about their new products and services. There was quite a lot of internal communications work, of behavioral policy initiatives, of sometimes employee well-being. So I really enjoyed the variety, and I was still hungry for something more. And of course, I was hungry on a physical level, but I was also hungry on a deeper level of, there was many moments where I was like, wait, I studied all of this for this. Like I remember working with like a big telecoms company for 3 projects in a row, and all we did was help them position their most expensive Wi-Fi in a way that more people would purchase it. And I was like, this is not what I came on the earth to do. Um, and so that was creeping in and probably adding some extra layers of stress as well, because there was a kind of this inner tension of, from the outside it looks like I'm doing all the things right, I found a way to still be like the perfect Londoner, but from my approach, but there was something that wasn't satiated inside of me.
So then what happened?
So then I was volunteering at an organization that helps people with disability go back into work, and helps and trains employers to see the incredible skills that some people with disability have, and to really make the most of these unusual and sometimes super important skills that they can bring to an organization. And I was just helping out on their open days, which was the main thing that they did, where some employers would come, some potential employees, and there would be coaches. And the coaches were there to facilitate conversations between each side, but also to train the individual sides. And one of the open days that I went to, there wasn't enough coaches. Some people didn't show up. And so they asked me to step in. They were like, Silba, you've been around for a little bit, just come and help us out. And so I facilitated a couple of groups. And at the end of the day, one of the main coaches came up to me and said, Silba, I don't know what you're doing with your life. I don't know what your career is, but this is your job. Like, you are meant to be a coach. The ease with which you did this is incredible. Your communication skills, your curiosity, go and find a coaching school. This is your path. And I remember being both honored and also a little bit annoyed, because I was like, I'm a high achiever. I'm a class A student. Being a coach sounds so like low. It sounds so like unprofessional. Like all I knew were like sports coaches or like fitness coaches, or I was like, meh, it feels like not a good use of my time. But it stayed in my head. And a few months later, in one of those moments where I was having a bit of an existential moment at work of being like, why am I doing this thing? I started researching in London, and I found a few coaching schools, and I went to their open days. And the first one I went to, called Animas School of Coaching, I went to the intro day and I cried the entire day, just out of recognition. I was like, oh my God, like everything they're speaking about is what I've been, catering my entire, not catering, my entire life has been moving towards this. This is what I really care about. And then I needed a few more months for my mind to catch up with that, and accepting that it could be something that I would train in and do more of. And the compromise that I got in my own mind was, okay, let's just do this as a hobby. It's like my side activity. And so I ended up doing their 1-year training. During the 1-year training, starting to work with clients, and then just realizing how much I loved it and how much impact was happening in clients' lives. And so my first big step was to move down to 80% of my consultancy job, so that I would be able to to have a whole day where I could dedicate to the coaching. And then slowly that took up more and more space.
So what happened during that first day where you had the response that you were crying?
Mm-hmm. Well, it's interesting because a lot of the tools and approaches that they used were basically what I had studied. So there was also this sense of already having an expertise. Like I recognized more just like on a logical and rational level. I was like, oh, these are the frameworks and models they're speaking about. But then the examples they were sharing about the kind of issues they were working with, that's really what hit home for me of like, oh, this is helping. I don't know, like what I wouldn't know what some of their examples were, but I can take examples now from the clients that I work with, like helping someone who's designed their entire life to have a certain level of success at work, but who's always um kind of put to the side their relationships, who turns 40 and realizes that what they're really longing for is to build a family, and then helping them see all the ways that they've built this story about themselves where they need to have a certain level of achievement to be worthy of love, and actually they realize that it's never enough, and to support them in really accepting that what they really want is actually the thing that they've been putting us to the side, and to support them in that process of opening up to their true desire, and then take action to come closer to that and meet all the fears in the way. um that would be one example, but there was so many, right? And it was so personal, it was so intimate, and in a way it almost came closer to what I really cared about when I was a kid, right? Like we spoke about in the previous episode of seeing my parents and not understanding why there was such a mismatch between their intention or what they said they wanted to do and then their action. Like I was right back there. I was right back at the everyday life decisions that seem so small and that yet define the quality of our lives so much more than the bigger decisions that we focus on.
Cool. Okay, so it was like everything you've learned, like this is where the path led you, and now you can actually use it to help the type of people you want to help rather than just helping BT sell more Wi-Fi or whatever it is.
Exactly. Yeah.
Cool. Okay. And you're a responsible person, so you went into it gradually. Unlike me, who just like blows my life up all the time when I'm ready for
Well,
change.
half. I would say that the world conspired for me to be responsible, because I actually quit my job in January 2020. And my plan was to leave London to go do a little tour of the world. I had planned to go to Canada and the US. Again, that California dream had stayed alive. And um and then COVID happened. And so a month after, or a couple of months after I had resigned, I ended up finding myself back in Belgium with my mom in the first lockdown. And I was still kind of finishing up my work at the consultancy. And when all the borders shut and they understood that I wasn't going to go travel, they asked me if I could stay and help them out with the business, at least for a few more months. And so I ended up going down to 60%. And then a year later, I shifted to being only on board on a project basis. So I would help on specific projects, usually every like 2-3 months. And I started choosing my projects. So I was only working on social impact projects rather than the telecom stuff that I honestly didn't know how to do anymore. Like physically, my body just was rebelling too much. Um, and so, life made me do it gradually, which I'm really grateful for, honestly, because I didn't realize at the time how long it takes to establish a business and how long it takes to establish a name. And in my journey as a coach, I've changed so much. Like from, I thought I had it all figured out because I had studied behavioral science, and then I did a training in transformational coaching, which was very it touched upon a lot of different coaching frameworks and models. And then by working with clients, started realizing, okay, we keep on getting stuck at the same point. It's like people build the awareness, they know exactly what they need to do, they put in the actions, and yet their willpower is not enough. Like something gets stuck. And I didn't understand, because they were all people who were really, really bright, usually who were really generous with a big open heart. And their intentions were true. Like I could feel it, that they really wanted to get there, but something was holding them back. And that's when also in my own journey, I found the path of somatics and somatic coaching, and how to include the body. And by that, to understand that a lot of our more like self-sabotaging behaviors aren't actually against us. They're patterns that exist in the body that were responses and reactions to trauma, to aversive experiences we had in our childhood and sometimes in our adulthood. And so then I decided to train as a somatic coach, and then to start including that in my coaching, and that completely changed my practice again. Yeah.
Wow. So what does that look like now if you're coming up to that block that you described? How
Yeah.
does somatics help transform that?
Well, one thing we focus a lot on is, and that I'm fascinated by, is the mismatch between our words and what we say we want, and our body's response to that. And that can be our posture, this can be the tone of our voice, it can be how we breathe, it can be just like our inner experience of being a body in the moment that we express that thing that we want. And sometimes it's just when we have certain thoughts, right? And so and that requires what I call somatic intelligence, or is called somatic intelligence, which is this awareness of what's happening in the body. And we live in a highly disembodied society, so actually all of our attention goes to our minds and our thought processes, and our bodies are kind of this bag of meat that we pull behind us, that we like take with us, and that we just feel like sometimes is collaborating and sometimes not. And so this is completely putting that on its head and saying, actually, we're also a body. Like I don't really see a differentiation between mind and body. I feel like that's the ultimate place, is there is no differentiation. There's just a oneness of being. But before that, we need to see that differentiation, because we have this overemphasis on the mind. And so it's helpful to see it as a duality with the body, and to say, okay, well, a big important journey is to go back to the body, to feel our bodies again, to reconnect to our bodies, to reconnect to our sensations, to know what our toe is feeling. And what that does is that it puts us in contact with all the things we haven't allowed ourselves to feel and experience, because we were so stuck in the mind. And often that's why we go in the mind, right? Because the human experience can be so raw and challenging and unbearable sometimes. And so it's easier to go and hide in mind processes. So when we enter back the body, often there's a first layer of having to meet a lot of resistance, of challenge, of pain. But if we stay there, and if we really bring attention and care, then the body opens up, and from there comes a quality of experience that is incomparable. It's just like all of a sudden we can experience life through our toes, through our knees, through every pore of our skin, and life just feels so much more full. And so many of my clients come to me saying they want to experience more fullness and wholeness, or they want to know who they actually are, or they want to just be happier. And often that happiness just comes from being in more of that fullness of being. And that comes with this humbling process of coming back to the body, of learning again the language of the body. So this somatic intelligence, soma means body shape, so it's intelligence of the body. And from that place, starting to notice where is there a mismatch between what I'm feeling in my body and what I'm thinking, or the stories I'm telling myself, or the words that I'm saying. And to use that mismatch not as a problem to solve, but as an opportunity to see that there's an inner conflict, and starting to really get curious of like, okay, I say that I really want a relationship, but whenever I say that, I have like my arms crossed and like I'm frowning. What does that tell me about what's happening inside of me? And really bring curiosity and care to that process. And what's fascinating, because I work with people who have super bright minds and really fast minds, and who are really good at reasoning and explaining, basically making a story up for anything they do. They can reason themselves out of anything. The moment you invite the body, and the moment you bring the attention to a body sensation rather than a mental process, there is a vulnerability and a simplicity that shatters the mind. It's like, wait, what? Oh, I'm feeling contracted, even though I'm saying I really want this. And just pointing to that contraction often breaks that over rationalization. And especially with people who have really active, sharp minds, I have found it's the most powerful tool to actually get to the bottom of what's going on, and to find integrity in body and mind, and in general with what we say we want, and then how we behave.
Cool. Have you heard of focusing? Eugene Gendling?
A what?
Focusing. It sounds similar. It sounds like this. Maybe it's different, but it's like um using the felt sense. So it's like where in the body, or say you're feeling like, oh, I want a new job or something, but I'm scared. And then it's like feeling, it's like, oh, there's like tightness.
Yeah.
And then it's describing the feeling like really,
Yeah.
rather than, I don't know, because somatic is so confusing to me, because now I'm doing somatic, with this like hormone stuff I was telling you about, and then that's like movements. So it's like, I don't know, I'm doing this 30-day course. I had no idea what it is, but it's like, okay, it's nothing crazy. It's just like rocking and stuff like that, because it's like, but then that's called somatic. And then, yeah, I don't know. So what does it look like when you in a coaching session with you? Like, would the person be like lying down, or is it's more like they're feeling into their body?
Yeah, it's really more of an awareness piece, and I agree. Like this, the field of somatic is endless, because somatic really just means in the body, right? Or from the body, and so it's really at the base it would mean just being human, because we are a body, but because we are in this like hyper mental processes, we need a separate term to speak about the body. And so it's anything, the way I see it, is anything that brings us closer to living inside of our bodies. And I don't know if I spoke about this specific concept last time, but I work with the concept of insourcing. So while a lot of our lives are outsourced, and we learn to outsource our decision making, we outsource our sense of worth, our sense of validity, of love. The process of insourcing is to live from the inside out rather than from the outside in. And to do so, we cultivate this deeper inner awareness of what's happening inside of our bodies, inside of our minds, inside of our different experiences. And we develop this intimacy with our own inner experience. So I would say that somatics is a lot about, it's all these different tools and practices to come back to this inner sense, also called proprioception. And basically, it's just a perception from the inside out rather than from the outside in. The way that I like to work is to really give full sovereignty to the people that I work with. And so that's why I sometimes guide them into a short, like, introduction meditation or practice, just so that we can regulate the nervous system enough to be at a place of balance as we go through the session. But then all the rest is just an invitation, and they are the one guiding me through their sensorial processes. So they tell me, like, I might ask, I might say, I feel like there's a mismatch between what you're saying and what is happening in your body. Can you tell me more about your embodied experience? And so they go and do the inquiry, and they tell me what's going on. And so really, I'm just the invitation for them to go and seek information in their own body. And that's because my one of the pillars of my work is really this piece around sovereignty. Like I don't want them to need me to guide something to them for them to feel like they can be at home in themselves. And actually, most of the practices that I invite them into are practices that we co-create so that they can really have this sense of ownership. And then it's their own practice. And then they learn how to shift those practices throughout life. Because I mean, even this meditation practice, right? The meditation practice I was doing 8 years ago wouldn't work for me today. And so to have this flexibility and having practices emerging out of what we know we need in that moment, that's really the aim, right? Is to have such deep intimacy with our inner experience that every time we have a challenging time or we have this need to tune into life in a different way, that we know how to design a practice for ourselves.
Amazing. And so important. So good to hear you say that, because, oh my God, so many people get trapped in these like codependent situations when I feel like it happens more with therapy, maybe, when they're just seeing their same therapist for 20 years and it's like they're both kind of dependent on each other anyway, rather than empowering people to be like, yeah, you can do it on your own, but obviously like you're being supported, but it's not like your life will fall apart if you don't come and pay me lots of money next week.
Exactly. I've had a few instances of having to fire clients, and I just say that in the sense of, we got, and I never know how long the process is going to work. I don't have predefined programs of like 3 months or 6 months, even though usually it's between 3 and 6 months. But most of the time people can just feel it. Like if we've gotten to that place of them really feeling their inner experience, there's going to be a moment where we both feel it in the relationship of like, this is great, you're telling me about your day, but you've done the work. Like you live back inside of your body, our work is done. And I really feel like and there's so much to be said about therapy, and there's such amazing forms of therapy, and I'd say that for certain issues therapy is still really powerful, but in general I feel like therapy is over prescribed, and a more self-reliant, ownership based therapy system is under prescribed. And I feel like, especially in talk therapy, it's really hard to ever get to a sense of ownership and completion, because even though you may have told your story for like the 100th time and you feel heard and you feel loved and accepted in that, you won't have built that inner system of feeling safe in experiencing what's coming in your life. And you can only do that when you bring your attention to the body. You can't do that just by about speaking about the past. And so that's really, to me, ownership only exists in the body, sovereignty only exists in the body. And so that's why, even though therapy can be really useful, at least in my opinion, should be complemented with more somatic work, and really this invitation to live back inside of our bodies, and to find this true sovereignty. Because a lot of what we move through in the sessions are our emotions, are things. There's so many clients that think that they have this monster that lives inside of them, and that they just spend their lifetime running away from this inner monster. And then we sit in a session, and just because I invite them to tune into their bodies, and they're like, actually there's this contraction in my chest, and they're like, oh, actually this contraction feels like it's gross and it's heavy, and it's like, okay, let's keep on going. And they realize that underneath that there's just like a pitch of sadness. And then, because they didn't go through a mental process but through a sensation, the tears come, and they allow themselves to feel the emotion, and then we witness the emotion and we just sit together in it. And they get to the end of it and they say, there's no more tears. What's happened? It's like, well, you felt the emotion. Instead of resisting it for 25 years, you have now met the emotion, and you're realizing the emotion is not that scary, and the emotion is totally valid, and the emotion won't kill you. And together we can love it back into fullness. um yeah, and that, from that, like the sovereignty of that, of like, oh my God, if I can feel my deepest, darkest monster, nothing in life is ever going to be too much for me.
Okay, so good. Okay, we have to wrap up. I feel like we could have a third conversation that's focusing on your spiritual journey, because I'm really interested in that as well, and all the places you've been, and I didn't know about the ashram stuff. I think I knew that you've been to, was it Costa Rica or some,
And
and
Aqua. Well, it's interesting because I feel like one thing that's incomplete that I'd love to share about at some point as well is the piece around sensuality and sexuality, which have been really key in my journey as well, and have now started being part of, like, that's the last piece of my professional life at the moment. Of I trained as a Tao tantric teacher, again thinking it was solely for my own exploration. After 4 years actually of exploring tantra on my own terms, um, and being quite, again, like a little frustrated by the field, and realizing that there's a lot of um there's a lot of incomplete knowledge out there, and a lot of subtlety that's missing, and a lot of spaces that are not actually really safe. Um so but from that personal journey that I went on, because I was really interested in reconnecting to that life force, to that creative energy that sometimes is called sexual energy, but really it's just the aliveness we feel in our bodies, that has brought to people starting to ask me about that. And so now it's a very big piece of my work as well. I would say there's one piece that's around purpose and identity, one piece that's around food and body image, and then the third piece is around vitality and sensuality and pleasure. And I would say that my spiritual journey and my pleasure journey are like really, really deeply intertwined, which is kind of, it's different from a lot of people who see spirituality as more of this practice of removing themselves from the world to connect to something bigger. I I very much like connect to the tantric principles of actually, like the divine, whatever that means to us, like the greatness of life is present in every single micro moment. And so let's really build that intimacy with each moment in our lives, and through that find our spiritual practice. So that's the two pieces that I feel like are interconnected.
yes, I love that. Yeah, because that is what to like remove yourself and sit on a mountain and take away everything strip everything out of life. That's not accessing like all that is consciousness and like the entire spectrum of the human experience. That's kind of, like what you were describing before. That's like the first level, like finding your peace. But then the full connection is like experiencing all of it. But knowing it is, I mean, that's the next level, when you just feel your consciousness is like it's all connected. There's no separateness between, and like, who even are you? You're not sitting behind your eyes. Like, where is your consciousness? It's like, anyway, okay, that's like okay, yes, the tantric stuff. This is the last piece.
Yeah. Mm.
Okay.
Do you have more questions for today?
Yeah, the last time I asked you how you stay grounded, but I'll just ask you the other two questions that I normally ask. Or maybe I'll just ask one and then I'll save the last one for the tantric episode. Okay, so is there a book that's had the biggest impact on you?
Mm. Mm. Hmm. I can't think of one specifically. There's definitely been quite a few books at different moments in my life. I mean, on the piece around food, There's this book that I spoke about, Women, Food, and God by Janine Roth. That's really interesting. And that really looks at that concept of hunger. But it's interesting because now in my line of work, I almost feel like I'm at a different stage than that book. So it feels like it was really, really formative at the time that I found it. And it was recommended to me by one of my best friends, Margot, who always has the most amazing books. But I remember reading that book on holiday and I couldn't stop it. And I was just like, oh my God, oh my God, oh my God. So I would say for Journey with Food, that would be one. And then maybe as an introduction for next time, there's this book called The Untethered Soul by Michael Zinger.
I just read it
Oh,
last week.
yay! Yeah. Yeah, there's one chapter in there that for me was quite transformational, which was this chapter that speaks about this. It's this metaphor, this image of this guy that ends up having a thorn in his, like a thorn enters his arm and he tries to get it out, but it's too painful. And so he keeps the thorn in his arm and basically designs his entire life for nothing ever to touch his thorn. And he ends up, like, the chapter ends, and I'm probably butchering this, but the chapter ends with him living in this house where everything is padded and he never lives the home, and he's wearing this suit and he hasn't seen a human in years. And I feel like it's such a beautiful representation of how so many of us live, because we have these deep, deep wounds inside of us. And we're so terrified of the pain of them. And we think that if we look at the wound, we're gonna die, they're gonna destroy us. And so we build all these walls of protections around the wound that end up making us feel disconnected from life, and that hold us back from truly connecting to people, from truly connecting to ourselves, and ultimately to truly connecting to life. And so we're so scared of dying, and that looking at this wound is going to make us die, but we end up living a half life. And that is really what I felt for most of my life. And I still see like little layers of that. And that I see my clients walk around, and that I see us do as a society, of like, no, don't stop and feel. Just protect it. Lay over it. I mean, even our, I'd say our policy systems are that. So, yeah, I feel very touched by that metaphor, and with it comes the invitation to dare to remove the layers, to dare to be seen, to be naked in our wounds. And with it comes my promise that actually that is the only way to live life fully again.
Yeah, that's so funny, because I remember that part of that story where he designs this thing to protect his thorn, so this contraption that no one can touch the thorn, and then he sells it and makes all this money by being like, guys, you can protect your thorn too, which I feel like is so much about society, and maybe even relates to what we were talking about before we started with the food stuff.
Yeah.
And my experimentation to be fully in touch with my body, eat literally whatever I want. Maybe the advice that's kind of halfway there is still trying to protect people from their wounds.
Yeah. Absolutely. Absolutely. And there's so many ways that we are sold ways to contraptions, like complicated shit that we spend a lot of money on so that we don't have to experience our wounds. And I'd say that that's what our entire consumer society is based on. It's like, buy this thing so you don't have to feel the wound. But it's all a farce. It's all bullshit, because in the end it just protects us from living life. And what all the people that I work with come to me with is this hunger to live again, this knowing that there's something more to life than what they've been told, and that surely it can't just be about ticking box after ticking box after ticking box. And so what we start doing, and that's the uncomfortable part of the work, is to remove the layers. And And what's beautiful is that by being in this line of work, it asks me to be in constant integrity around that, of noticing where am I putting on a layer. And as you said at the start, like there is this power all of a sudden when we know we're doing it for someone else that invites us to overcome ourselves and overcome our limitations. And so knowing that I stand here, and for so many people, they see me as the person who lives in integrity. Like I've become even more um aware of the moments where I'm not in integrity, and it becomes the service that I have to do. So even when there's like a bunch of resistance, I'm like, I have to. I have to. Yeah.
Amazing. Thanks so much. I'm so excited for part 3.
Yay!